One question that I often have is when I'm thinking about developing an app, should it be a
Mm.
mobile app or a web app? And yeah, mobile app, having that real estate is very important on somebody's iPhone and sending
Mm.
notifications, but web app seems to be much easier to execute. So how do
Mm.
you make that decision? And is it an MVP to do a web app and then transition, or how do you think about that?
MVP, it doesn't really make sense to do. Well, it doesn't really matter either way. And if the eventual decision is to go native app or mobile app, then it's better just start out with that same thing. That way you don't throw away the code. Now, in terms of whether to do mobile or web app, it really depends on the content, like the business model, the actual app itself, what it's trying to do. Like you said, if you are using a web app, you cannot do push notification to the user. So the engagement factor, it's much more difficult when it comes to web app. So companies have to rely on email marketing and search engine, ads and stuff like that to drive people to the web app. But to re-engage them, there's not really a good way to do it other than relying on emails. Whereas with apps, not only are you getting push notification to try to bring your customers back into the fold, you can also do a lot of more tracking with an app as well that allows you to know more about the customers and allow you to iterate on the product better. So in general, there's obviously that friction of having to download the app, but that's a one-time thing. So if you have a combination, that's obviously the best in the sense that the user can also get to your web app as well if they want to, instead of downloading the app. But then you can provide some incentive for them to go from your web app to the app store to download the app. That is usually the strategy. From an MVP standpoint, I think it makes more sense to do an app instead of web app because right off the bat, you can offer the user the most optimal experience. And then also you can track a lot of data that could be very useful for you to iterate on the MVP.
So let me ask you then, which one is more expensive? Let's say exactly the same specs. Is a web app more expensive or a mobile app?
I would say that it's actually going to be about the same. So now if you use something like React Native, which is a technology used for cross-platform development, then the cost differential is even smaller because with React Native, you can target iOS and Android at the same time. Whereas with if you were to use native, you have to build it for iOS and then you have to build it for Android. So in that sense, the cost could be higher than doing web app because web app would work on both iOS and Android right off the bat. But if you use something like React Native, which is allows you to create native app for both platforms, the differences between the two are quite small. And then there's also a way to do apps using React Native that will allow it to also work on the web, like literally creating like a spawning off like a web app variant of it with less time. So instead of doing web app, 100% of the time and web, so basically spending say 2 weeks on web app and then 2 weeks on the React Native app, you can start with the React Native app, but do it in such a way where you get a web app out of that in less than 50% of the time. So that's also another way to go well.
Generally, if I'm thinking web app versus mobile app, you're saying it's pretty much the same cost, same time frame. So think about it from a business perspective first.
Cost is about the same, but you do get a lot more benefits because from the push engaging, re-engaging the users, and also from tracking the users and also because when you're using React Native, another really good reason for that is that you don't have to submit your changes to the, like one of the advantage with doing web app is you can make changes and people can pick up the changes right away. With React Native, you can do the same. You can push the code, the changes over the air. People won't have to re-download the app. You don't have to submit the app for review again. So that advantage on the web app side is actually not going to be there if you're using React Native.
So if I'm making updates, upgrades, changing functionality, there on the web app, there's no impact because somebody logs in and they see the new experience. With the mobile app, they have to re-download, right?
Yeah. So typically, if you're not using React Native, you would have to re-download the app to pick up the new changes, the new updates. So sometimes if the app developer wants you to use the latest changes, sometimes they would force you to download the app when you launch the app. With React Native, you don't need to. You don't need to resubmit the app if you want the user to pick up the changes. Literally, when they launch the app or relaunch the app, they can see the change.
And in terms of being more flexible in terms of changing developers, which one is better? Like if you're doing a mobile app, are you more restricted?
if you're using React Native to do the cross-platform development, then really it comes down to finding, because it's using JavaScript as the language, it's the same language that's driving a web app or the web in general. So if you're obviously getting someone that has no mobile experience, then they would obviously would have to ramp up on their mobile knowledge. But the language itself is not going to be a barrier. It's more of their sort of mobile knowledge. But mobile knowledge is important even if you're doing web app. So in terms of hiring, it should not be that hard. If the person knows how to do React on the web.
And how should somebody think about the friction of downloading the app? How big of an impact is that?
Yeah, that impact again depends on whether the user perceives the cost of downloading the app versus the value they're getting from using the app, right? So if it's just me consuming some news content, having to download the app might seem too heavy for them. They might just want to go to a website to do it. But if they're getting a lot of benefits from having the app experience, then I think that friction is worth it. So another way to do it is that, again, if it is not an MVP, you can have web app and the app, so that if anyone were to come to you through on the web app, you can provide them incentive to download the app. Meaning that, hey, if they go to a web app, they get additional benefits, additional features, and also potentially discounts or something in order for them to, because you do save on having to re-engage them later on. Like the cost of that is, you're going to be saving on that, and you're going to know a lot more about them down the line as well when they're using the app, because you can track the usage pattern.
So my takeaway is web app versus mobile app doesn't make a difference. Think of it as a business decision. And if you're going mobile app, use, if you can, React instead of making it natively for iOS. So it's much more flexible. I
would say so. So for most use cases, React Native or Flutter is a Google technology. Same thing, you can use that for cross-platform. But Flutter cannot do code push, which is the update over the air. React Native has that capability. So I would say from a cost standpoint, it doesn't really make sense to start with web app unless the friction of having to download the app is higher than the value that you get. But from a long-term standpoint, it always makes sense to also start from doing it in the app, because you don't have to throw away the code. You can still you can still use it.